The birth of a temple of American football in Green Bay is inseparable from the history of a small city that dared to dream far beyond its size. In the mid-20th century, when professional sports in the United States were becoming increasingly dominated by large metropolitan areas, Green Bay, Wisconsin, stood as an unlikely outpost of ambition, perseverance, and community pride. Nestled in the northern Midwest, surrounded by icy winds, snow-covered streets, and a population that barely surpassed 100,000 people in the 1950s, Green Bay was not supposed to host greatness on a national stage. And yet, it did. Out of this modest and resilient city emerged a stadium that would become sacred ground for American football fans around the world, Lambeau Field. To understand the origins of Lambeau Field, one must first return to the roots of the Green Bay Packers themselves. The franchise was founded in 1919, in the aftermath of World War I, by two men whose vision would shape not only a team, but an entire sporting culture. Earl Curly Lambeau, a former high school football star, and George Calhoun, a local journalist at the Green Bay Press-Gazette, joined forces to create a professional football team at a time when the sport was still struggling for legitimacy. Back then, professional football lacked the glamour, wealth, and national attention that college football enjoyed. It was considered rough, unstable, and often temporary. Many teams appeared and disappeared within a few seasons. Survival itself was an achievement. Curly Lambeau, however, believed that Green Bay could sustain a team built on discipline, innovation, and deep ties to the community. He secured early sponsorship from the Indian Packing Company, which gave the team its now legendary name, the Packers. From the beginning, the franchise belonged to the people. Unlike teams owned by wealthy individuals or corporations, the Packers grew as a community-supported organization, a unique model that would later become one of the most distinctive features in all of professional sports. As the Packers joined what would eventually become the National Football League in 1921, they played in a series of modest fields and local grounds, reflecting both the limitations and the spirit of the city. For decades, games were held at City Stadium, located near East High School. While the venue served its purpose, by the early 1950s it had become increasingly clear that it could no longer meet the demands of a growing league. The NFL was expanding, modernizing, and drawing larger crowds. Other teams were building bigger, more advanced stadiums in cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. Green Bay, despite its rich football tradition, risked being left behind. By the mid-1950s, the future of the Packers in Green Bay was genuinely uncertain. League officials openly questioned whether such a small market could continue to support a professional team. Attendance issues, outdated facilities, and limited revenue streams fueled rumors that the Packers might be forced to relocate to a larger city, such as Milwaukee, or even beyond Wisconsin. For the people of Green Bay, this possibility was unthinkable. The team was not merely entertainment, it was part of the city's identity, a symbol of collective pride and resilience. In response to this existential threat, local leaders and citizens took decisive action. In 1956, after intense discussions and public debate, the city approved the construction of a new, modern stadium. It was an extraordinary decision for a city of Green Bay's size and economic capacity. The project was driven not by corporate ambition, but by communal determination. Construction began swiftly, even as winter loomed and temperatures dropped well below freezing. The urgency was clear. Without a new stadium, the Packers' future in Green Bay might be lost forever. The stadium officially opened in 1957 and was initially known as City Stadium, a simple and practical name that reflected its municipal ownership. It was built on the city's west side, an area that would soon become synonymous with football tradition. At the time of its opening, the stadium had a seating capacity of approximately 32,000, modest by today's standards, but impressive given the context. It was designed with functionality in mind, prioritizing sight lines, durability, and the ability to withstand Wisconsin's brutal winters. Despite its simplicity, there was something immediately special about the new City Stadium. From the first kickoff, it became clear that this was more than just a sports venue. The atmosphere was intense, intimate, and deeply emotional. Fans sat close to the field, their breath visible in the cold air, their voices echoing across the stands. The sound of cleats on frozen turf, the crack of pads colliding, and the roar of the crowd created an experience unlike any other in the NFL. Visiting teams quickly learned that playing in Green Bay, especially late in the season, was a unique challenge. The late 1950s and early 1960s marked a turning point not only for the stadium, but for the Packers themselves. In 1959, the franchise hired Vince Lombardi as head coach and general manager, a decision that would forever change the course of football history. Lombardi arrived in Green Bay with an uncompromising philosophy centered on discipline, execution, and mental toughness. He transformed the Packers into a dynasty, leading them to 5 NFL championships between 1961 and 1967, including victories in the first 2 Super Bowls. Under Lombardi's leadership, City Stadium became the stage for legendary moments. The frozen field witnessed iconic games, dramatic comebacks, and displays of sheer willpower that embodied the Packers' identity. Perhaps the most famous of these moments occurred on December 31, 1967, during the NFL championship game against the Dallas Cowboys, later known as the Ice Bowl. Played in temperatures that plunged to -13 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill far colder, the game remains one of the most iconic contests in sports history. Although the stadium would later be known as Lambeau Field, the Ice Bowl cemented its reputation as football's most unforgiving and revered battlefield. In 1965, a profound and symbolic change took place. Earl Curly Lambeau, the man who had co-founded the Packers nearly half a century earlier, passed away in June of that year. His death marked the end of an era, but also prompted a powerful act of remembrance. Later that year, City Stadium was officially renamed Lambeau Field in his honor. It was a fitting tribute to a man whose vision and determination had made everything possible. The renaming was not merely ceremonial, it was an acknowledgement that the stadium, like the team itself, was inseparable from Lambeau's legacy. From that moment on, Lambeau Field was no longer just a place where football games were played. It became a symbol of continuity, tradition, and authenticity, in a league increasingly shaped by commercial interests and relocation threats. While other franchises moved from city to city, chasing larger markets and newer facilities, the Packers remained anchored in Green Bay, their home protected by the unwavering loyalty of their fans and the enduring presence of Lambeau Field. Over the decades, the stadium would undergo numerous renovations and expansions, adapting to modern standards while preserving its historic soul. Seating capacity increased, luxury boxes were added, and technology improved, yet the essence of Lambeau Field remained intact. The bleachers, the close proximity to the field, the harsh winter conditions, and the overwhelming sense of history continued to define the experience. What makes the birth of Lambeau Field truly remarkable is not just the year it opened or the games it hosted, but the circumstances that made it possible. In 1957, few would have believed that a city as small as Green Bay could build a stadium that would one day be spoken of with reverence alongside the greatest sports venues in the world. Yet, through collective effort, shared belief, and an unbreakable bond between a team and its community, Green Bay did exactly that. Today, Lambeau Field stands as the oldest continually operating stadium in the NFL, a living monument to the past and present of American football. Its origins remind us that greatness does not always emerge from wealth or size, but often from unity, perseverance, and love for something larger than oneself. Born simple, shaped by history, and elevated by legends, Lambeau Field remains a true temple of football, not because of its concrete and steel, but because of the spirit that has filled it since the very beginning. The story of Vince Lombardi and the eternal glory he forged in Green Bay is inseparable from the transformation of a simple football stadium into one of the most legendary and revered places in all of sports. When the 1960s began, Lambeau Field was already standing as a symbol of survival and community pride. But it was during this decade that the stadium transcended its physical structure and became something far greater, a sacred ground where history, discipline, sacrifice, and victory were carved into frozen grass and cold iron forever. In 1959, at a moment when the Green Bay Packers were struggling both competitively and emotionally, the franchise made a decision that would change the course of American football. Vince Lombardi arrived in Green Bay as head coach and general manager, stepping into a city that lived and breathed football, but had grown accustomed to disappointment. The Packers had endured years of losing seasons, and doubts lingered about whether the team could ever return to prominence. Lombardi, however, brought with him an unshakable belief that greatness was not a matter of talent alone, but of commitment, precision, and character. From his first days in Green Bay, Lombardi imposed a culture that was relentless in its pursuit of excellence. Practices were demanding, expectations were absolute, and excuses were non-existent. Players quickly learned that wearing the green and gold was not just about athletic ability, but about embracing a way of life rooted in discipline and accountability. Lombardi famously believed that football was a game of fundamentals, and that perfection, while impossible to achieve, could be relentlessly pursued. This philosophy echoed through every corridor of Lambeau Field, from the locker rooms to the frozen sidelines. As the Packers began to transform on the field, Lambeau Field itself took on a new identity. No longer was it merely the home stadium of a small market team. It became the proving ground of a dynasty. The cold winds of Green Bay, once considered a disadvantage, became an ally. Visiting teams arrived knowing they were entering hostile territory, not because of intimidation, but because of the unyielding environment shaped by Lombardi's Packers. The freezing temperatures, the hardened turf, and the roaring crowd created conditions that demanded both physical toughness and mental resilience. The 1961 NFL season marked the true beginning of the Lombardi era's dominance. That year, the Packers captured the NFL championship with a decisive victory over the New York Giants, a powerful statement that Green Bay was no longer a struggling franchise, but a force to be reckoned with. Lambeau Field played a central role in this resurgence, hosting games that showcased not only strategic brilliance, but a level of execution rarely seen before. Each snap, each block, and each perfectly timed play reinforced the idea that this team was building something historic. The following year, in 1962, the Packers repeated their success by once again defeating the Giants to claim another NFL championship. These back-to-back titles were more than trophies. They were validation of Lombardi's philosophy and proof that excellence could thrive even in the smallest market in professional sports. Fans packed Lambeau Field, enduring snow, ice, and bitter cold to witness what felt like destiny unfolding before their eyes. The stadium became a place where hardship was shared and triumph was celebrated collectively, binding the team and the community together in an unbreakable bond. As the decade progressed, Lombardi's Packers continued to define an era. After a brief setback, the team returned to championship form in 1965, capturing another NFL title and reaffirming their place at the top of the league. By this point, Lambeau Field was no longer just associated with football games. It had become synonymous with winning itself. The very name of the stadium evoked images of frozen breath, determined faces, and a relentless pursuit of victory. The mid-1960s also marked a period of transition for professional football as the NFL and the AFL moved toward eventual merger and the creation of a championship game that would crown a true national champion. In January 1967, the Packers faced the Kansas City Chiefs in what would later be known as Super Bowl Y. Played at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, the game represented a new chapter in football history. The Packers' victory not only secured their place as the first Super Bowl champions, but also extended the legacy that had been forged at Lambeau Field. Though the game itself was played far from Green Bay, the identity of the team, the discipline, precision, and toughness, had been shaped on the frozen fields of Wisconsin. Just 1 year later, the Packers repeated the feat by winning Super Bowl II, defeating the Oakland Raiders in January 1968. This victory solidified Lombardi's Packers as the most dominant team of their era and perhaps one of the greatest dynasties in sports history. The championships of 1965, 1966, and 1967 combined with the earlier titles of 1961 and 1962, formed a legacy that few teams have ever matched. At the heart of it all stood Lambeau Field, the silent witness to countless hours of preparation, sacrifice, and unrelenting effort. Among all the legendary moments associated with this era, none captured the mystique of Lambeau Field, quite like the NFL championship game played on December 31, 1967, against the Dallas Cowboys. Known forever as the Ice Bowl, the game was contested under some of the harshest conditions in sports history. Temperatures plunged to minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill that made the cold nearly unbearable. The field was frozen solid, turning each step into a test of endurance. Yet, it was in this brutal environment that Lombardi's philosophy was put to its ultimate test. In the final moments of the Ice Bowl, with the Packers trailing and time running out, Lombardi made a decision that reflected his unwavering confidence in preparation and execution. A quarterback sneak by Bart Starr, behind a perfectly timed block, sealed the victory and sent Lambeau Field into a state of frozen ecstasy. That single play became one of the most iconic moments in football history, symbolizing everything Lombardi stood for: courage under pressure, trust in fundamentals, and belief in one's teammates. From that day forward, Lambeau Field was no longer just legendary, it was mythical. Vince Lombardi's impact extended far beyond wins and losses. His leadership shaped men, not just athletes, and his words resonated long after games ended. Phrases like, "Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing," became ingrained in the cultural fabric of football, even when often misunderstood. At Lambeau Field, those words took on deeper meaning, representing a commitment to excellence that transcended the scoreboard. Lombardi's untimely death in 1970 marked the end of a defining chapter in the history of the Packers and the NFL. Yet, his legacy did not fade. Instead, it became immortalized in the very structure of the sport. When the Super Bowl trophy was officially named the Vince Lombardi Trophy, it ensured that every championship celebration would carry his name forward. Each year, when the trophy is lifted by the champions of the NFL, it serves as a reminder that the standard of greatness was set decades earlier on the frozen fields of Green Bay. Lambeau Field, forever linked to Lombardi's name and philosophy, emerged from the 1960s as more than a stadium. It became a shrine to football's purest ideals: hard work, resilience, unity, and respect for tradition. Players who step onto its turf feel the weight of history beneath their feet, knowing they are walking where legends once stood. Fans who fill its stands are not just spectators, they are guardians of a legacy built through decades of sacrifice and triumph. The transformation of Lambeau Field during the Lombardi era is a story of how leadership can elevate a place into legend. What began as a practical solution to keep a team in a small city became, through discipline and vision, one of the most sacred venues in sports. In the bitter cold of Green Bay, Vince Lombardi forged an eternal flame, one that continues to burn in every championship pursuit, every frozen game, and every echoing cheer within the walls of Lambeau Field. The cold has always been more than a backdrop at Lambeau Field. From the very beginning, it became a defining character in the story of the stadium, shaping its identity, its legends, and the psychological weight it imposes on anyone who dares to step onto its frozen ground. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, winter is not a season that politely arrives and leaves. It settles in with authority, wrapping the city in snow, ice, and biting winds that seem to test the limits of human endurance. Over time, this brutal climate stopped being an obstacle and instead became one of the greatest weapons ever wielded by a football team. By the 1960s, Lambeau Field had already earned a reputation as a difficult place to play, but it was the unforgiving cold that elevated that reputation into something almost mythical. Long before modern heated fields and advanced sideline technology, players faced the elements directly, feeling every gust of wind cut through their uniforms and every step crunch against hardened turf. For the Green Bay Packers, this environment was familiar. For visiting teams, it was a shock to the system. The cold didn't just affect muscles and breathing, it seeped into the mind, creating doubt, hesitation, and fear. This reality reached its most dramatic expression on December 31st, 1967, the day of the legendary NFL championship game between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. The contest would later be known simply as the Ice Bowl, a name that still carries a sense of awe and dread decades later. On that New Year's Eve, Green Bay was locked in one of the coldest days ever recorded for a professional football game. The temperature hovered around minus 25 degrees Celsius, with wind chill driving the perceived cold even lower. Metal benches burned the skin. Breath froze in midair. The field itself became a solid, icy surface, more like concrete than grass. Lambeau Field that day was no longer just a stadium. It was a battlefield. The wind swept through the open bowl relentlessly, howling through the stands and across the field, refusing to offer even a moment of relief. Players struggled to maintain footing. Hands went numb within seconds, making even the simplest tasks, catching a snap, gripping the ball, executing a block, feel monumental. The pain was constant, but quitting was never an option. Not in that place, not under those conditions, not with everything on the line. For the Dallas Cowboys, one of the most talented teams in the league, the Ice Bowl was more than a championship game. It was an encounter with an environment that seemed to actively resist their presence. Every hit felt harder in the cold. Every mistake felt more costly. Lambeau Field amplified the pressure, turning the climate into an invisible opponent. The Packers, led by Vince Lombardi, appeared almost immune to the suffering. They had trained in it, lived in it, and accepted it as part of who they were. As the game unfolded, the scoreboard reflected how evenly matched the teams were, but the conditions slowly began to tip the balance. The Cowboys fought bravely, matching Green Bay's intensity play for play. Yet the longer the game continued, the more Lambeau asserted its influence. The cold drained energy, slowed reactions, and tested resolve. It became clear that winning in Green Bay required more than talent. It demanded mental toughness and an ability to endure misery without breaking. The final moments of the Ice Bowl remain etched into football history. With time running out, and the Packers needing a touchdown to win, Vince Lombardi made a decision that embodied everything Lambeau Field represented. There would be no trickery, no hesitation, just trust in fundamentals, strength, and will. Bart Starr's quarterback sneak behind Jerry Kramer's decisive block pierced the frozen defense and sealed a victory that felt almost elemental in nature. When the game ended, Lambeau Field erupted, not just in celebration, but in shared survival. Players and fans alike had endured something extraordinary together. From that day forward, the Ice Bowl became more than a game. It became a symbol of Lambeau Field's power. The story spread across the league and into popular culture, reinforcing the belief that playing in Green Bay, especially in winter, was a uniquely punishing experience. Opposing players began to speak of Lambeau with a mixture of respect and apprehension. Coaches adjusted game plans, knowing that conditions could not be controlled. Even before kickoff, the stadium imposed its will. Yet the intimidation of Lambeau Field was never only about temperature. The cold was merely the most visible element of a deeper psychological challenge. The proximity of the fans to the field, the echo of their voices, and the sense of history pressing down from every direction created an atmosphere unlike any other. In Green Bay, football was not entertainment. It was identity. Generations of families passed down stories of frozen games, legendary victories, and unforgettable moments. When opponents arrived, they were not just facing 11 players in green and gold. They were confronting decades of belief and tradition. The wind that whipped through Lambeau carried more than icy air. It carried memory. Each gust seemed to remind visiting teams of what had happened there before, of champions forged in cold and opponents broken by it. The frozen ground itself felt alive with history, bearing the marks of countless battles fought under similar conditions. For many players, the challenge was as much internal as physical. Doubt crept in. Hands stiffened. Focus wavered. Lambeau Field demanded total commitment, and anything less was punished. Over the years, advances in technology would soften some of the physical extremes. Heated fields, improved equipment, and modern facilities would make games safer and more manageable. But the mystique remained. Even as the league evolved, Lambeau Field retained its reputation as the ultimate test of toughness. The cold still arrives, the wind still bites, and the psychological weight of the place continues to loom over every visiting team. As this journey through time comes to a close, the echoes of everything you have just experienced still linger, much like the roar of a crowd after a legendary game at Lambeau Field. Stories like this do not end when the clock runs out or when the lights fade. They continue to live on in memory, in emotion, and in the curiosity that drives us to look deeper than the final score. Behind every iconic stadium, every historic team, and every unforgettable moment in sports, there are human stories filled with struggle, passion, sacrifice, and triumph that deserve to be told with care and intensity. If you are someone who feels drawn to real stories that go far beyond statistics and trophies, stories rooted in real places, real people, and defining moments in history, then this space was created for you. Here, we dive into the legendary arenas of world sports, revisit decisive dates, and walk the same paths once taken by icons who changed the game forever. From frozen fields in Green Bay to historic matchups that shaped entire generations, each story is crafted to immerse you in the atmosphere, the tension, and the meaning behind every moment. By subscribing to the channel, you become part of a growing community that values storytelling as much as competition, context as much as victory. Leaving a like is more than a simple gesture. It helps keep these stories alive and reaching others who share the same passion for history, curiosity, and authenticity. Activating the notification bell ensures that you never miss a new chapter, a new legend, or a new deep dive into places where sports became something bigger than the game itself. This is a place where stadiums are not just structures, teams are not just logos, and matches are not just numbers on a scoreboard. Each video is an invitation to step inside moments that defined eras and left lasting marks on culture and identity. As long as there are stories to uncover and legends to revisit, the journey continues. So stay with us, subscribe, support the channel, and keep exploring these unforgettable narratives. Because here, the game never truly ends. It simply finds new ways to be told. What makes Lambeau Field truly intimidating is not just the weather, but the way it reflects the spirit of the Packers themselves. The environment rewards preparation, discipline, and resilience, values instilled by leaders like Vince Lombardi and passed down through generations. In Green Bay, suffering is not something to avoid. It is something to embrace and overcome. That mindset, forged in the cold, has become inseparable from the stadium's identity. To play at Lambeau Field is to step into a living narrative where climate, history, and human will collide. The Ice Bowl of December 31st, 1967 stands as the ultimate expression of this truth. But it is only the most famous chapter in a much longer story. Every winter game adds another layer to the legend, reinforcing the idea that Lambeau is not merely a venue, it is an adversary. In the end, the cold of Lambeau Field does more than freeze fingers and numb faces. It strips the game down to its core, revealing who is truly prepared to endure. It transforms football into a test of character, where fear must be confronted and resilience must be proven. That is why Lambeau Field continues to inspire awe and intimidation. To face the Packers, there is to battle not only a team, but an environment that has been shaping champions and breaking spirits for generations. The story of Lambeau Field does not end in the frozen glory of the past. Instead, it flows naturally into the present, carrying with it decades of memory, sacrifice, and identity. As the NFL entered the 21st century, many historic stadiums across the United States were torn down or abandoned in favor of sleek, futuristic arenas filled with glass, steel, and luxury. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, however, the challenge was different. The question was never whether Lambeau Field should survive, but how it could evolve without losing the soul that made it sacred in the first place. Beginning in the early 2000s, Lambeau Field underwent a series of major renovations that would redefine what it meant to modernize a historic stadium. The most significant transformation began in 2001, when a massive redevelopment project was launched to expand capacity, improve fan comfort, and introduce modern amenities while preserving the stadium's unmistakable character. New seating sections were added, luxury suites were constructed, concourses were widened, and state-of-the-art technology was integrated throughout the facility. By the time the renovations were completed in phases over the following years, Lambeau Field had been reborn, not as something new, but as something renewed. What made this transformation remarkable was the care taken to honor history at every step. Unlike many